In the past few months, we have covered the essential history of the Hunnic people, from the rise of the Xiongnu Empire under Modu Chanyu, also known as Bagatur, to the arrival of the Huns in Europe and the apex of Attila's reign as the most fearsome ruler of the West. We discovered how the Huns migrated from the Altai Mountains to the Volga River, and how their invasions accelerated the so-called Barbarian Invasions of the Germanic peoples across all of the European continent. But we further established that the barbarian narrative was one of political bias, and that both the new Germanic kingdoms in West and South Europe, as well as the Turkic successors to the Hunnic Empire in Eastern Europe, initiated the transition between the ancient and the new feudal medieval period. However, there is one major group of equestrian nomads that also bears the Hunnic label, the Huns of Central Asia, because in between the fall of the Xiongnu in the 2nd century and the rise of the Huns in Europe during the 5th century, a variety of steppe warriors invaded and annexed large parts of Central Asia. This period encompasses the Kidarites, who were so powerful that they forced the mighty Sasanian Empire in Persia to pay tribute, the Alchons, who contributed to the fall of the Gupta Empire in India, and finally the Hephthalites, which created the largest of these Hunnic states, in the process merging several traditions and religions to a new melting pot of cultures. In this documentary, we are going to explore all of these lost Huns and explain their mysterious origins, their motifs for war and conquest, as well as the socio-economic dynamics which contributed to their integration into the rich backlog of Central Asian history.
Ey Türk! Üstte mavi gök basmasa, altta yağız yer delinmese, senin ilini, senin töreni kim bozabilir? Artık titre ve kendine dön.
Let us first summarize Hunnic history as it has been covered on Khan's Den previously. After watching our first 3 videos regarding the Xiongnu, the Huns, and post-Roman Europe, it would be logical to assume the following. Modu Chanyu gathered the Turkic-speaking tribes of then Turkic-speaking Central Mongolia, the Altai Transbaikal area to be exact, under a single political banner. Modu and his successors expanded their territory and ruled over the first steppe empire in history, and albeit never conquering the lands of the sedentary Chinese in the south, they did become a threat for Chinese aspirations. After 2 centuries, the Xiongnu state fell apart due to Chinese conquests as well as inner political strife. Then, several tribes moved away from the core Xiongnu area, with one certain group migrating along the Eurasian steppe belt into the west, into Europe. That group became known as the Huns, and starting in the year 375, wreaked havoc across Eastern and Central Europe. And although Attila the Hun never conquered Roman territory either, he, like Modu a few centuries prior, became a threat for the security interests of his major sedentary rival. Through their conquests and alliances, Attila and the Huns indirectly contributed to the fall of the Western Roman Empire, as their foreign policy had massively accelerated the migration of several Germanic peoples. Among them, the Vandals, who, with Alanic assistance, established a kingdom in Roman Africa, the Visigoths and Suebi, who took over the Iberian Peninsula, and lastly, the Turkilingi and Ostrogoths, who would conquer Italy and establish a new, non-Latin kingdom with Roman laws intact. However, there is another major group of Huns who seemingly had connections to the Xiongnu and, unlike the group of Attila, did not migrate as far away and instead settled in Central Asia, a group that would collectively become known as the Huna among its Indian and Iranian neighbors. This term encompasses the Kidarites, the Chionites, the Alchons, the Nazak, and the Hephthalites. However, the relationship between those groups and the Xiongnu, the quote-unquote original Huna people, is difficult to grasp. To understand how both groups might have been related and why the Huna people went as far as Iran and India if they descended from the northeast in the first place, we need to take a look at the fate of the steppe peoples after the fall of the Xiongnu Empire. There are 3 factors crucial for the decline of the Xiongnu, as previously mentioned. First, internal fractures and civil wars, as different factions and tribes within the empire fought against each other, leading to a decline in their cohesive power and unity. Second, economic struggles. The economic framework, which largely leaned on the practices of plundering and imposing tributes, found itself unsustainable in the long run. As their might receded, so did their capacity to maintain a stable economy through these traditional avenues. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the Han dynasty's military campaigns. The Han dynasty orchestrated numerous campaigns aimed at diminishing the northern Xiongnu's stronghold and expanding their territorial dominion. A pivotal moment manifested during the monumental Battle of the Altai Mountains in 89 CE, a campaign spearheaded by Han General Dongxian. He was assisted by the southern Xiongnu. This coalition proved catastrophic for the Xiongnu forces, with the Allied forces not only annihilating 13,000 soldiers, but also facilitating the surrender of an extensive network of 81 tribes, comprising 200,000 individuals. The battle was so triumphant that Dongxian let his traveling historian carve an inscription into a mountain in Yanran, near the Gobi Desert, boasting his success. For the Xiongnu, in any case, the situation worsened over time, and by 100 CE, the empire was practically no more. Their western territories were now firmly under the Han dynasty's control, and the southern Xiongnu found themselves economically tethered to the Han. In 155, the tribes of the Xiongnu in the north were defeated for the last time by the Xianbei, another tribal confederation created by the Donghu. If you remember, it was the Doghu Mongolic tribe that had been driven out of eastern Mongolia during a campaign by Modu Chanyu 2 centuries prior. The Xianbei took revenge and even went as far as the Caspian Sea in the west, effectively replacing the former Xiongnu state. By this time, many Xiongnu tribes were on the run, with some migrating to the west, where they settled near the Wusun. Called Yueban, these likely Turkic-speaking warriors established a small kingdom of their own. Much later, when they came into confrontation with the Ruran, it is narrated that Yueban shamans conjured a fierce snowstorm, a divine intervention that halted the Ruran advance, forcing them into retreat back to Mongolia. Less magic-ridden and more historically proven are the reports of other tribes that belong to the Xiongnu settling further south and southwest in what is effectively modern-day Turkestan, the area of modern Turkic-speaking Central Asian republics, which also includes Xinjiang, part of the People's Republic of China. The first of the tribes whose history seems feasible are the Chionite Huns. While the exact origins of the Chionites remain a topic of debate among historians, it is likely that they descended from the Altai Mountains. Avid viewers of our channel will recognize the Altai region as the center of many paramount steppe empires and kingdoms. The Chionites migrated into Transoxiana and entered the territory of the Kushan Empire. The Kushan had established their rule over Bactria and its surroundings around the year 30. The founders of the Kushan state were the Yuezhi. Sounds familiar? These former nomadic pastoralists had become prey of Modu Chanyu when, in 176 BCE, he attacked and expelled them from Gansu. While the Xiongnu were building and expanding their nomadic empire, the Yuezhi were on the run to the west. In Bactria, they overran the Greco-Bactrian kingdom during the 2nd century BCE and established the Kushan Empire. Over time, the people inhabiting this region became known as Tokarans, which is why historians have linked the Yuezhou to the Tokaran people. According to Ammianus Marcellinus, one of our sources for this video, the Chionites were living among the Kushan by 356. Ammianus notes that the Chionites moved to Bactria, where they became Kushan vassals, absorbing their culture and language. Initially opposing the Sassanid Empire, they later joined its army as mercenaries under leader Grumbates, who can be identified with Kurum Pat. Kurum means governor in Old Turkic, and indeed, it seems likely that the Turkic language was at least part of Chionite identity at their time of arrival. As Richard Fry points out, Turkic-speaking tribesmen composed the ruling class, although the bulk of the people likely spoke an Iranian language. After the Chionites, all Central Asian nomadic peoples would speak Turkic languages. The story of Kurum Pat is most extraordinary. During his time, Sassanid king Shapur II engaged in battles against the Romans, led by Constantius II, while also facing the Chionites on Persia's northeastern frontier. During a campaign, Shapur had had to spend time in Chionite territory during winter. By 359, Shapur allied with the Chionites, thereby integrating their soldiers into his army and initiated an invasion into Roman Syria. The Persian king was accompanied by the Chionite king Khurram-Pat, whom Ammianus described as a formidable middle-aged man. He further stated that Khurram-Pat would have been a man of moderate strength, of a certain greatness of mind, and distinguished by the glory of many victories. He further described the Chionites as the most capable warriors in the Persian army. This coalition targeted the strategic Roman stronghold of Amida, today's Diyarbakir, in southeastern Turkey, where historian Ammianus was present, chronicling the events firsthand. The alliance was strained when a Roman projectile killed Khurram-Pat's sole son, inciting the father's vengeance and forcing Shapur to commence a lengthy, resource-draining 73-day siege on Amida. The lost son, whose name Ammianus does not mention, was mourned for 7 days during subsequent festivities. His body was burned, which was actually an outrage for the Zoroastrian Persians. The siege was successful, city captured, most of the Roman leaders executed, the residential areas destroyed, and the population deported to Khuzestan province in Iran. The aftermath of these events and Khurram-Pat's fate remain undocumented. The short-lived Turco-Iranian alliance then dissolved as the Chionites left the Persian army due to high casualties, with the Chionites and Persians resuming hostilities post-360. From 360 onwards, however, Shapur and the Persians did lose territory in Central Asia, with Bactria falling into the hands of the Chionites and the Kidarites. These two groups may have been identical. It seems that the Kidarites, also known as the Karmir Shion, the Red Chionites, were a subdivision that was a vassal entity of the Kushan Empire. Varahan, emperor of the Kushans, introduced a coin in around 340 or 345, which first depicted the Kidarite Tamga. Tamgas are symbols of tribes, clans, and even empires in the Turk and Mongol world. Like the Gokturks, Oghuz Turks, and Mongols of Genghis Khan much later, the Kidarites used their Tamga as a sign of self-identification. Perhaps Varahan was even serving the Huns as a puppet by this time. In any case, he was soon to be the last ruler of the Kushan, as Kidara took his throne and called himself King of Kusha, effectively establishing what historians call the Kidarite Kingdom, to differentiate them from the Kushans. The first coins depicting Kidara as a great ruler show how he differed from the other local rulers. He was depicted with partially slanted eyes and clean-shaven, a sign that he and his people were indeed from the Altai and not from Bactria or the surrounding area. The Kidarite Kingdom established its headquarters in Samarkand and became a focal point in the trade routes of Central Asia, closely collaborating with the Sogdian people. Despite Persian narratives painting them as destructive barbarians, the Kidarites operated a strong governmental structure and effectively collected revenue across their lands. Furthermore, during the second half of the 4th century, the Kidarites dealt several blows to the Sasanian Empire to the west, forcing them to pay tribute. According to Priscus of Panium, our most beloved historian from the past episodes, these payments only stopped when Persian King Yazdgerd II refused to bow to the Huns. A fortress called Kafir Kala, a modern term which means fortress of the infidels, was created and used by the Kidarites in the 4th century. They left behind coinage and several seals, with one of them reading, King of the Oglar Huns, the great Kushan Shah, the Afshiyan of Samarkand. Afshiyan was a princely title, meaning as much as governor of Samarkand, the capital of the new state. This section illuminates the self-identity of the Kidarites, as their ruler did call himself King of the Huns, but also took on the title of Kushan Shan, thereby inheriting the Kushan Empire. Kushan Shah was mentioned in these seals, which, on the other hand, had been the center of the eponymous former empire. This hints at the fact that the Kidarite Kingdom now controlled Kushanshar, which historically encompassed the territory between Bactria and Peshawar in modern-day Pakistan. And indeed, the Huns did not stop in Central Asia. Within 2 decades, the Kidarite Kingdom expanded into India, conquering at least the region of Gandhara near the Peshawar and Swat valleys. According to the Mansour inscription and the Bitari pillar inscriptions, the empire was nearly destroyed during the invasion of the Huna people. While the Gupta Empire's counter-offensives were somewhat successful, the Kidarites kept control over the western part of the Gupta territory. Meanwhile, the Sasanian kings had stopped paying tribute since Yazdegerd II. This was the premise for the Kidarite attack on the Sassanid Empire under Peroz I in 464. As the Persians lacked manpower, Peroz offered the Kidarites peace and his sister for marriage to the Kidarite king, simply called Kunkas in Persian sources. As Peroz sent a woman of lower status instead, Kunkas asked for 300 Persian military experts in return for the peace deal in order to strengthen the Kidarite army. Upon arrival, he had all 300 of them either killed or wounded and sent back to Ctesiphon, bringing the message to Peroz that this had been a reaction to the false promise made to Kunkas. This Kidarite trap, however, may have initiated the end of the Kidarite Kingdom. In the north of the Kidarite realm, a new group of Huna people appeared. Being known for their semi-nomadic lifestyle and for their elongated skulls, these Alchons occupied Bactria by 370 CE. As the Kidarites had moved their center to Gandhara, the Alchons took over the Kabul region and even engaged in skirmishes against the Sassanid Empire during 385 CE. Interestingly, they already minted coins and took on a design and symbolism that resembled that of the Persian kings. It is here where we can read the name Alchono. Thus we have proof that the Alchons did indeed use this name as their self-designation. In any case, these Huna people consolidated their rule until the ascension of Kingilla, their most famous ruler, or should we rather say infamous. Kingilla gained control over the Hindu Kush trade routes previously held by the Kidarites. Artifacts, including coins featuring Kingilla and another ruler, Mehama, have been discovered at Mez Aynak, a Buddhist complex southeast of Kabul. This confirms their influence in the region from around 450. Diplomatic channels with China were also initiated in 457 under the Alchon regime. As other Hunnic groups like the Uars and Chionites were fleeing due to the arrival of the Wusun in the Pamir region, who in turn had been driven away by the Ruran Khaganate, Kingilla decided to unite these tribes. According to a compilation of Zacharias Rhetor in the 6th century, parts of the Uars and Chionites had simultaneously migrated westwards to the Ponto-Caspian region, effectively displacing the Sabirs, who then drove away the Onogur tribes. You might remember this migration from our last video about the Onogur people. In any case, Kingilla became rather mighty. There is even a coin making use of Brahmi script that says, God King Kingilla. Even more astounding is the seal of Kingilla, which is unfortunately part of a private collection. The Alchon ruler also appears in the Talagan copper scroll, along other Alchon kings like Mehama and Toramana, who we mentioned in a previous video for bearing a name that suspiciously resembles the Turkic name Toramen, meaning the righteous one. In any case, Kingilla's successor, Mehama, expanded Alchon influence. Reigning until 493 CE, he was instrumental in aiding Peroz I in overthrowing the Kidarites in 466 CE, and possibly played a role in securing Peroz's ascent to power against his sibling Hormizd III. As the Gupta Empire had defeated the Kidarites in 455 CE, They were literally crushed by a joint attack of the Sassanids in the west and the Alchons in the north. The Alchons then filled in the Kidarite role in Gandhara and Punjab, while he had submitted to the Sassanids, taking the role of a governor in the process. Muhammad successfully maneuvered for greater autonomy later on and established outright independence from the Persians. Thus, he had helped destroy the Kidarites, while, at the same time, making the Alchons sovereign towards Persia and India. It is possible, however, that the Alchons and Kidarites did coexist peacefully at some point, as this Hephthalite silver bowl suggests. But the Alchons did not stop. Under the rule of Toramana, or Toramen, they invaded large parts of northwestern India, even reaching as far as Iran, which is located in the center. In the process, he assumed Indian titles like Jauvla, as the Kura inscription tells us. In the Gwalior inscription of Mihirakula, written in Sanskrit and rediscovered in 1861, was described as a ruler of earth, of great merit, who was renowned by the name of the glorious Toramana, by whom, through his heroism that was specially characterized by truthfulness, the earth was governed with justice. In the ancient town of Iran, a boar inscription, he is mentioned in the very first line as the great king of kings. This did not stop the Alchons from advancing and pillaging, in the process sacking Kausambi. Toramana's great rule, however, came to an end after a decisive defeat at the hands of the Aulikara tribe in 515, as documented on the Risthal inscription in Madhya Pradesh. By this time, the Alchons had consolidated their rule over Sindh and Multan, when, in 520, his son, Mihirakula, advanced once again. He successfully sacked the Gupta capital Pataliputra and left it in ruins. Only 8 years later, he was stopped by an alliance of several Indian states at the Battle of Sondani. By 540, the Alchons had virtually lost all of territory in northern India. The Alchons are known for their great conquests, but also for their persecution of Buddhism. They literally left urban culture in ruins, while also targeting centers of learning across North India. The Indo-Roman trade was also damaged, but they also left their own mark on the region, massively influencing the minting of coins for centuries to come. But the Huna invasions did not stop. There was one more group coming in from the northeast that would impact the history of Bactria and Sogdia, and this time even reach far into the east. The Hephthalites, also known as the White Huns, were a nomadic confederation that emerged in Central Asia around the 4th to 5th century CE. They expanded their territories into parts of modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern India. Notably different from the Kidarites and even Alchons, the Hephthalites had significant cultural and military impact on the regions they conquered. For example, the Hephthalites managed to build a complex administrative system despite their nomadic origins by adopting and adapting practices from the settled civilizations they came into contact with or conquered. Nomadic societies often had fluid social structures that allowed them to quickly mobilize for war, but these structures were typically not sufficient for administering large, settled populations. The Hephthalites likely incorporated existing administrative practices from their conquered regions, which would have included taxation systems, law codes, and governance hierarchies. In fairness to the other Huna groups, we should take into account that the White Huns may have also learned from the successes and failures of their Huna predecessors. We mentioned in a previous video that their self-designation was probably Eobdalo, often shortened to Eb. Unlike the other Huna groups, we also know that the Hephthalites used the title Yabgu for their rulers, as shown in documents found in Rui in Afghanistan, akin to other Turkic dynasties. The Chinese, on the other hand, used the name Yeda or Hua, while the Indians referred to them both as Hunas and Sveta Huna, the White Huns. Like the Chionites and Kidarites, the Hephthalites most likely were of Turkic origin, and later took on the Bactrian language, with their geographical origins also being in or around the Altai region. Some scholars, like de la Vessière, consider the Hephthalites to be the political and even cultural heirs of the Xiongnu Empire, suggesting that their migration was, like with most other Huna people, triggered by climatic conditions which negatively affected the grazing grounds of the Altai region. Their reign in Central Asia unfolded almost contemporaneously with that of the Huns in Europe. Even Procopius, a Byzantine historian, connected both peoples, but deemed the Hephthalites to be more urban and civilized. The Chinese had their own speculations about the Hephthalites, establishing connections between the Hephthalites on the one hand and the Turkic Tiele and the Iranic Yuezhi people on the other hand. In the Tongdian, a Chinese encyclopedia of the 8th century, the Hephthalites were said to have originated north of China and migrated through the Altai to the west around the year 350. The affiliation with the Tiele would suggest a Turkic origin, and the Hephthalites being speakers of Ugaric Turkic, again, like the Chionites and Kidarites before them. Politically, the Hephthalites rose to prominence in the early 5th century, following an initial setback against the Sassanid Empire, as evidenced by findings at the Bandian archaeological site. After this initial clash, they later forged alliances with the Sassanids, only to eventually invade Sassanid territories with success. Concurrently, they expanded their dominion to include Bactria, incorporating regions such as Balkh and Kushanshah, and even reaching as far west as Merv. By 509 CE, they had also subjugated Sogdia to the north and the entirety of the Tarim Basin in the east, effectively stretching their territorial reach to what is now modern-day Xinjiang or East Turkestan. They never gained much ground in India, unlike the Alchons, but at the same time became acquainted with the religion of Buddhism. The Buddhas of Bamyan were made during Hepthalite rule. In the corresponding paintings, they incorporated cultural aspects from Buddhism, but also Tokaran Kushan Bactrian traditions, and even the god Mithra, who was especially popular in Sogdia. In terms of religious diplomacy, evidence suggests a relationship between the Hephthalites and the Patriarch of Constantinople, leading to a more visible Christian presence in Hepthalite territories. Though the identities of individual Hepthalite rulers remain largely unknown, their strategic control over the Tarim Basin and Central Asia gave them dominion over key segments of the Silk Road. By the middle of the 5th century, the Hephthalite Empire had reached unparalleled dimensions, marking the zenith of noble influence and power. This peak was soon to be eclipsed by an enigmatic force emerging from the east. However, they first had to deal with their arch-nemesis in the west, the Sassanid Persian Empire. When Khosrow ascended the throne in 531, adopting the name Anushirvan, he inaugurated a bold, expansionist strategy targeting Central Asia. Although primarily celebrated for his legendary confrontations with the Eastern Roman Empire, Khosrow significantly augmented the Persian territories in the east. As recorded by the 9th century Iranian historian Al-Tabari, Khosrow succeeded in wresting control of Sindh, southern Afghanistan, Tokharistan, and the Kabul province, essentially the entire Bactrian region from the Hephthalites. The Persians were mighty. He only did so, however, in an alliance with the steppe warriors who were just emerging as a new power at the Altai region. Because in 546, a chieftain called Bumin took all of his courage and revolted against the 30-year rule of the mighty Anagui Kagan, the ruler of the Ruran Empire. By 552, the Ruran were destroyed, and Bumin's clan, known to their neighbors as the Ashina, but self-identifying simply as Turk, took over the administration. Within less than a decade, an expansive army, being commanded by Istemi, viceroy, and Bumin's younger brother, and under supervision of Mukhan, Bumin's son, arrived from the Altai region and embarked on an invasion of the Hepthalite Empire. The reasons for their attack seems to be shrouded in mystery, but in reality, there was a clear casus belli, a reason for war, perhaps even two. As the Turks were approaching, the Hephthalites sent 2 embassies to the Western Wei Empire, neighbors of the Turks in China, asking for an alliance. As a reaction, Istami sent a proposal of his kind to Khosrow and offered his daughter for marriage, resulting in her later becoming the mother of Persian King Hormizd IV. Then, the Turks and Persians together attacked and defeated the Hephthalites. As noted by the Iranian epic writer Ferdowsi, the Huns scrambled reinforcements to the Oxus River, where Turkic forces had gained ground. As the Turks seized Bukhara's Ark, the citadel and capital of Sogdia, and with the Persians capturing Sindh and Bactria, the Hepthalite Empire crumbled. Remnants of it became dependent on either Turkic or Persian rule. Thus, in 560 CE, the last of the Hunnic kingdoms in Central Asia fell.
But we have to add that, in a twist of fate, Istemi chose not to annihilate the Huns. Instead, he orchestrated a political ploy, incorporating them into his Göktürk military machine. As if breathing life into a fallen world, he spearheaded the reconstruction of the entire territory, revitalizing its irrigation and canal systems. Khosrow sensed the impending tide. Istemi's ambitions knew no bounds, spilling into Iranian lands with his new Hunnic allies. It took nothing less than a face-to-face encounter with Khosrow to halt and sway them. For the moment, the Turks fell back to Bukhara. The Persians sensed a looming storm, and Byzantium too had caught whispers of this seismic shift. The tale of a seemingly unstoppable empire, ruled by the Ashina dynasty, had traveled to the far reaches of Eastern Europe. Oblivious were the societies stretching from Europe to China, from Korea to Persia, to the wellspring of Göktürk ambition. Only the Turks themselves knew the depths of anguish fueling their relentless advance. Years of subjugation had forged them. Soon, no corner of the steppe, or even the settled world, could escape their reach. They would all hear the deafening sound of the drums of liberation.
Basmasa, altta yağız yer delinmese, senin ilini, senin töreni kim bozabilir?